I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Volkswagen T-Roc. New to Australia, that is, because we've been waiting some time for this small Volkswagen crossover to arrive on our shores, but Volkswagen have been promising that the wait will be worth it, and we're going to be interrogating that question on today's episode. Now, T-Roc deliveries are only officially scheduled to start in another couple of months' time, but we've got our hands on an example here of the spec of T-Roc that's coming to Australia first, and that is the 140 TSI Sport. The price tag starts from just above 40,000 Australian dollars, but if you load up one of these cars with all the options, like this one, you'll be pushing almost 50 grand drive away. So it's a fairly premium little SUV in terms of where its maker is positioning it. So does it make sense? Is this a vehicle that you'd consider over and above a small SUV from another brand, and even as an alternative to, say, an Audi Q3? Come with me in this video and we'll find out as we check out the T-Roc's cabin, the practicality, how many people and how much stuff you can fit into this little crossover, and then we'll take the T-Roc in 140 TSI form out onto the road to see how this baby Volkswagen, or perhaps pumped up Golf, drives. Jumping into the front seat of the new T-Roc, and it's a real mixed bag. Plenty of good stuff, but some other things that you might not expect at this kind of price point. And I'm going to start right there, and it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, and that's hard plastics. I know not all of you care about it, but for me, feeling hard plastics here on the dash and all the way through the doors is a bit of a disappointment when a base model Golf, which costs about $25,000, has a much more refined approach to cabin materials. Thankfully, that's about where the negatives stop in the cabin of the new T-Roc, because the rest of it is classic Volkswagen, and a nice Volkswagen at that, because in the T-Roc hierarchy, what Volkswagen Australia are calling the 140 TSI Sport sits pretty high up in the lineup. In fact, above this car, it's only the T-Roc R. So that means that we get really nice elements like this sports steering wheel that looks like it's straight out of a GTI with its red stitching. We get taller bolsters for the seats, and in this leather, or at least leather-like material if you go for the luxury package, and we've got really good infotainment as well. In terms of that technology, we have an 8-inch screen up here on the dash, mounted nice and high near your line of sight. It can tell you coming in, it's got that gesture control feature, it's got navigation, and it has wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and it basically works exactly as you'd expect. If you go for the sound and style package, you're also going to get Beats audio, you're going to get those really cool looking Suzuka alloy wheels outside. Now the active info display works really well. It's basically the same as that in the Polo, so the resolution on the mapping isn't quite as high as some other Volkswagens, but it still looks really cool, crisp, clear, and it basically shows you a full map right in front of you, which makes you feel like you know where the road is going to go. So the software as a whole works really well. The sound quality is really good too. In terms of the seating, you do sit elevated above and beyond where you'd be in a Golf, and that's one of the advantages that many people see in a small SUV like this. The seats themselves offer a decent amount of support, though to be honest, I think I'd prefer cloth, given that we are still stuck with manual adjustment here. We don't have electric adjustment even on this fairly spendy specification of T-Roc, but the mix of colors looks pretty cool. We've got this light sort of outer piece on the seat, a gray inner, and then black cloth down on the side. So I think that they are an attractive seat, and it does blend well with the darker plastics on the dash, but as I mentioned, they're majority hard. So, you know, you'll need to have a sit in the T-Roc and just see that it sort of matches your tastes. In terms of practicality, it is good. So we have a big tray here ahead of the shifter. We have 2 cup holders, or 2.5, and we have this adjustable armrest and a deep box between the seats. So getting into a good, comfy driving position is going to be nice and easy. So up front, on the whole, I think it is a nice, grown-up, mature, small SUV with some high-end touches, including the technology on offer. Just wish that the early assurances that Australia would have got soft touch plastics had have been borne out. On that note, let's check out the back seat. Here in the back of the T-Roc, the experience starts with that same very solid thunk of the door that sets it apart from some of its Asian rivals. But in terms of space, it's also quite impressive. So if I sit up straight, sitting behind my own driving position here, I still have another inch or so of headroom, even with this car's panoramic sunroof that comes as part of the luxury package. And that's because even though outside it looks quite attractive for a vehicle in this segment, it's not crazily sloped in terms of roofline, so you can still get 6-foot adults into the back. In terms of legroom, I've got another inch or inch and a half behind my driving position, and tow room is no trouble at all. So this is a pretty practical car if you have a young family, or if you're just looking for it for, couples, but you might need to use the back seats every so often for friends or a pet. The T-Roc has plenty of space. Now, I do think you could get 3 people across the back in a pinch. The hump in the floor isn't massive, it's just that this middle seat is really, really narrow. So if you're just traveling with outboard passengers, they'll be able to enjoy the use of this substantial flip down armrest with cup holders. There's also air vents and a 12-volt socket, though there aren't better, more modern USB ports for device charging here in the back. Also, the door does stay hard back here, except for a padded armrest, but that's about it. However, seat comfort is fairly decent. Next, we'll check out the boot space. This particular T-Roc, as I mentioned, is equipped with the luxury package, which gives it an electric tailgate here around this quite cleanly styled rear end of the vehicle. And you can let me know if you think it's an attractive SUV down below. But that boot operates quickly, and once it opens up, you get a practical storage space that looks so much like the one in a Golf, and it's so similar even on paper. We have 392 litres of space on offer here, and that's because every T-Roc that is currently coming to Australia is equipped with Volkswagen's 4Motion all-wheel drive system, which takes up a little bit of the extra space. Two-wheel drive T-Rocs do have a bigger boot, but none of those are in Australia, at least for the moment. Anyway, you can definitely fit a couple of larger suitcases into this boot. In terms of special features, it's a little bit fewer and further between than some Volkswagens, but we do have 2 shopping bag hooks. In terms of underfloor storage, there is a good amount of room back there and a space saver spare, but you kind of would need to put something else in there to help store the items and stop them from rolling around. But you have a nice sturdy cargo cover as well. And of course, with the luxury of a powered tailgate, it's just a button push away from closing, so you can jump into the driver's seat and see what this little SUV is like to drive. So what is the new T-Roc like to drive? Well, technically this is our second experience driving the 140 kilowatt T-Roc together. The first was over on the ice in New Zealand last winter, but it's pretty different driving a car on sealed road compared to ice, and we were only able to take this all-wheel drive T-Roc onto the slippery surfaces last year. So this really feels like pretty much a first experience with the car. So how does it stack up? Well, before we get to that, let's talk about where the T-Roc fits into the Volkswagen lineup. So we know that it's their second smallest SUV. It's bigger than the T-Cross, but it's quite different to that car in ways that extend beyond simple size. And that's because the T-Cross, like the Polo, is based on a lower cost derivative, the A0 derivative of the MQB platform, whereas the T-Roc, like the Golf that it's essentially based on, rides on the fully fledged MQB platform, and that means stuff like packing a fully independent rear suspension. That means it rides and handles better. It's also a little bit quieter and more refined, and it's based around using 4-cylinder engines rather than being based around 3-cylinder engines like the T-Cross. And it isn't just any 4-cylinder that we get in this Australian spec of T-Roc. It's actually a very nice one because it's the EA888 2-litre turbo, the same engine that you'll find in the Polo GTI or the Golf GTI or in lots of other premium 4-cylinders in the Volkswagen Group lineup. Now, we don't have GTI outputs here in the T-Roc, but it's still pretty healthy, 140 kilowatts of power and 320 Newton meters of torque. And that means that the T-Roc 140 TSI feels pretty brisk actually. It'll do a 0 to 100 sprint in 7.2 seconds, so it's not lightning fast or anything like that, but certainly in-gear acceleration comes on nice and strong, and it feels much faster than the T-Cross with its 85 kilowatt turbocharged 3-cylinder engine, for example. So there is a big upgrade in that department. Now, overseas there are lower powered and higher powered versions of the T-Roc. By higher powered, I really mean the T-Roc R, which sadly is in doubt for Australia, even though that would be very, very cool. But the T-Roc does need to be significantly faster and more refined and just better than the T-Cross, because it's a lot more expensive In fact, this car that we're driving now, which has all of the options on it, is over $45,000 list, which means it's going to be about $50,000 drive away. And for a vehicle that's essentially a Golf SUV, that's fairly pricey. Now, luckily, I think the T-Roc looks really good outside, and so it can trade on its looks factor, on its increased practicality over a Golf with all-wheel drive, and of course, SUVs are just the more fashionable choice of the day. But largely, the driving experience is very similar to a Golf. So if you're not averse to driving a hatchback, then you can save a lot of money by going down that route instead. That being said, you can't get an engine this powerful in a non-GTI Golf, so the T-Roc certainly has that in its corner. But the ride and handling are very much Golf-like, although a slightly raised Golf, maybe a bit more like an all-track if that came in a hatch form. So starting with the steering, which is very nice, it's delivered through this small performance steering wheel, which Volkswagen actually no longer offer. The sort of R-line steering wheel is different these days, but this is the old style one, which I actually prefer. The steering itself is really quick, and the T-Roc feels agile. It's got a light front end, so it pitches into corners really crisply and quickly. It wants to be driven a little bit harder, I think, than some rivals like the CX-30. It feels a little more sporty and a little more athletic, but in a testament to Volkswagen's really mature, grown up driving dynamics, it rides really well despite feeling like a sporty option in this class. And that's even on these optional 19-inch Suzuka alloys that look really good, even though we've got a pretty thin amount of tire. We have the optional adaptive dampers in this car, which actually are very noticeable. So in comfort, you get a bit of float. In normal, it feels good and resolved. And then in sport, it's really stiff, probably too stiff for most people on Australian roads. But even in comfort, if you have these 19-inch wheels, you occasionally will catch a hard-edge pothole that is just part of life in Australian cities, and you definitely feel that in the cabin. As standard, the car comes on 18-inch wheels and fixed dampers, but I think that would still deliver a nice ride because you're going to have a little bit more sidewall to help cushion those blows. Refinement levels are pretty good though, with tyre noise and wind noise generally well insulated. You do sit quite a bit higher than in a Golf. The visibility out's good. We've got big mirrors, I think basically the same mirror as you get on a Tiguan, so the view of behind you is good. There's only one thing which interferes a little bit with visibility for me, and that's all that expansive scratchy plastic up there on the dash is actually quite shiny, so it tends to sort of reflect into my eyes a little bit. And that's a functional reason for you why soft touch plastics with that dull matte finish tend to be good at more than just being plush. They also don't reflect the light as much. Now in terms of safety, all that kit is included. Volkswagen now call the suite IQ Assist, and you get AEB, high-speed AEB, adaptive cruise, lane keep assist, blind spot monitoring, and rear cross traffic alert, and also rear AEB as standard on the T-Roc, but there's no 360-degree camera, just a standard rear-facing view. So those are our detailed opinions of the new 2020 Volkswagen T-Roc, an SUV that we've been waiting on for some time, but one that I reckon delivers on many of its promises, mainly delivering that sort of upmarket driving dynamic that we're used to from Volkswagen in a package that is pretty handsome and I think a lot of people are going to find quite appealing. The price is up there, but given the strategy to launch with basically a loaded model first, that is understandable. And of course, there's a new T-Cross as well, which offers a slightly smaller SUV, but at a significantly lower entry price point that you can also consider if you're after a little Volkswagen crossover. Let me know what you think about the new Volkswagen T-Roc below this video. While you're down there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.